We have Dr. John in the studio from Creation Ministries International. Good afternoon, Dr. John.
Good afternoon, Mick.
It's great to have you back again, and this could be the last week for a little while, only because we've got our software and stuff all sort of up and running in the studio, so we can talk to New Zealand again next week from CMI. But look, Creation Ministries International, a huge organisation which all their guys know a lot about creation and evolution. And that's why we have a bit of a chat every week. Some very, very interesting and insightful information that we get. And, of course, we ask all of you guys to send questions through to us. If you have any questions, send them to our text line, 0401 949 949. Now, and also hello to Isabel, who's in the studio with us as well.
Good afternoon, everyone.
It's good to have you here this Savo. Now, let's start with a question that we got a few weeks ago, Dr. John. It came in from Bob. How though, Dr. John, rather, I think it's hello. How then, as a believer, when we see heaps of variation in the world amongst people groups, the rest of the natural world, how do we reconcile that as creation compared to evolving change? So, yeah, I guess we're talking about, well, I guess skin colour and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, well, look, that's one. And Isabel had a couple of questions along those lines.
Well, yes, I do. I guess my question is along the lines of, is there an explanation as to why that you find in the Northern Hemisphere, the majority of the people that, say, live and were born and bred there, that they have a certain eye colouring or skin colouring tone or hair tone, and then how starkly different that is to those of us, many of us, that live in the Southern Hemisphere, and you're looking at maybe olive skin, brown eyes, brown hair. Is there something in that could provide us with insight to this? Yeah,
look, you can actually explain all of that when you, first of all, and this is what we're always on about at Creation Ministries. What we're on about is the truth of the Bible from the very first verse, right? And because we say the Bible is true, we then look first of all at what does the Bible say, and then we find that all the observational evidence, like, as you say, variations, and as Bob asked for, variations in people groups, you find that absolutely fits with what the Bible has always said. And, it is a great question, and it's the sort of thing that we get all the time. And one of the classic examples is that of, you've mentioned eye colour, Isabel, but skin colour, you mentioned that, Mick. And these are the things that people look at and they say, look, there's so much difference between people, it must be evidence of evolution. But when you look at the science underlying it, you can see that it isn't really evidence for evolution. It is all very, very consistent with what the Bible has always said. Now, let's go first of all to what the Bible says about where did people come from. Now, we all know about Adam and Eve, and we all know about what the Bible says about the generations before the amazing event in human history, which was Noah's flood. And what the Bible tells us is that everybody on the face of the earth is descended from the survivors of the flood. Mm-hmm. Now, everybody else at that time got wiped out. Now, those people were Noah and his wife, Noah's 3 sons and their wives, 8 people. Now, we don't know that, we're not told, and we presume she didn't, that Mrs. Noah had any more children after the flood. Noah was 500 years old, so Mrs. Noah might have been fairly elderly as well. So, we just don't know. But if we then say, well, look, that means everybody is descended from Noah's 3 sons and their wives. Now, that doesn't seem a lot of people, does it? But when we then look at the children that they have, there are only sons named for those 3 boys, but there are 16 of them. So Noah had 16 grandsons, and these are the sons of his sons. Okay, now it doesn't mention daughters, but then you have to realise that that first generation after the flood, they were all siblings or first cousins, right? And they all spoke the same language, and they were all free to intermarry and intermix. Now, what we have to assume, and this is an assumption, but it's not an unreasonable one, is that the genetics for skin colour were all there in those people. The 6 survivors, or the 6 survivors of the ark, who then gave rise to other children, right? The 3 boys and the 3 women. Now, skin colour is genetically determined, and we get dark skin colour if we have a large number of melanocytes, that is, cells that produce melanin pigment in our skin cells. And the more of that melanin pigment you produce, the darker your skin. And it seems that skin colour is genetically determined, and we can have genes for many melanocytes or genes for very few melanocytes. If you happen to get the dark skin genes, then you're going to have dark skin. If you have the light skin genes, then you're going to have light skin.
I've got both. I've got freckles.
You've got freckles. Well, dark-skinned people don't usually get too many freckles, but people with light skin do. And we get blotchy skin. Sometimes it's not an even colour. But the reason is we don't have too many of the melanocytes in our skin. So what happened then? Well, the Bible then tells us that there were 5 generations after the flood where people were able to freely mix together, all these descendants of the boys and their descendants and their descendants and so on. All of them were living in the same general area. After they left the ark, they found a plain on the land of Shinar, according to the Bible, and they dwelt there. And they were all gathered together in fairly a single sort of area, in really defiance of what God had told them. He said spread throughout all the world, and they didn't do that. And the Bible tells us that they all spoke the same language. But there would have been quite a large variation in skin colour between them, because all the genes for all the different types of skin colour were there. Now, what happened then? Well, the Bible tells us that they decided to build a big tower at Babel, and that was really in defiance of God, because they were looking to serve false gods by doing it. And God decided to confuse their languages and make them disperse over the whole world as he wanted them to do originally. And he did it by language groups, and those language groups were also done by paternal lines. So he dispersed them by their languages and by their paternity. And you have to presume from that they were divided into tribal groups, with all the men being of the same sort of tribe. Now, all of the adult males at that time would have had wives from all the other different groups. And when you do tracings of people throughout the world, you can trace where the men come from pretty well, but it's not quite so easy with the women, because they were not divided by paternal groups. They were the wives of the men who were divided by paternal groups. Now, what happened then with the dispersion? Well, as they spread all over the world, then the people with skin colour conducive to survival in the area that they went to would have thrived, and the ones with skin colour that wasn't conducive to that area would not have thrived so well. Now, if you think of people with light-coloured skin, people with light-coloured skin don't need a lot of sunlight to produce vitamin D, and they don't want a lot of sun exposure, otherwise they're prone to skin cancers. So the lighter skinned people would tend to have survived better up in northern climates where they had to rug up because we had seasons after the flood and they wouldn't have had so much sun exposure, whereas the people with darker skin who didn't need much, who needed really a lot of skin exposure to sun exposure to get vitamin D, but are not prone to skin cancers, would have gravitated to equatorial regions. So that's why we have so many light-skinned people in the northern climates and so many dark-skinned people in the equatorial climates. And then you raise the issue, Isabel, of eye colour. Now, most people in the equatorial regions and other areas have brown eyes, and brown seems to be the predominant original eye colour. Blue eyes seems to be genetically determined, and it's a genetic mutation. Now, if you have people with the same mutation congregating in the same area, their progeny are going to have the same sort of eye colour if that gene for blue eyes is a mutation. So there you have the explanation to what our questions were today, all starting from the Bible.
We have Dr. John in the studio from Creation Ministries International. We've been having a very interesting chat this afternoon in regards to people groups and skin colour and eye colour and that sort of stuff. And Dr. John, I know when I was in Lake Tahoe working in a ski resort, I can remember it was getting towards the end of the season where I saw one of the African Americans up in the resort. And I was sort of shocked at the time, only because I hadn't seen an African American in the resort all season. And you watch so many American movies, and I know there's a lot of African Americans in America or in the USA. Then, like, I've asked Eben about it because he's African American, and he said, "Oh, I hate the cold." And I thought, is that something like, do African Americans, people with darker skin, like, I love the cold. Personally, I hate the heat. So obviously there's potentially something there.
Yeah, look, I think there is, Mick, and when you think about it, the African-American population in the US is a bit over 20%, I think. It's, it's quite substantial. And you said that in the whole of the ski season you hadn't seen any. And your friend then said, well, we don't like the cold. And, of course, here we are in Australia, and when you think about where the people really did come from, the white Americans came from Northern Europe, or Europe. The African Americans obviously came from Africa. If we come here to Australia, the Aboriginal people, who were the first inhabitants of the country for sure, they were dark-skinned and they were living in a wonderful sunny country. So, it's all consistent with what the Bible says about the dispersion of people and where they would have thrived. Now, of course, in our modern world, it's been completely upturned, hasn't it? The African Americans were taken to the northern climates against their will. Here we have a lot of the white Australians came here against their will as well, and a lot of my ancestors are amongst those. They came out from Ireland and England in ships and chains as well. So I think the modern world is so mixed. I mean, we are now a multicultural society. We've got people from everywhere, really, and I don't think you can look at our society now and say, well, what we see now confirms what the Bible has said. But the way the dispersion was originally, it was consistent with what the Bible has always said. And Bob mentioned in his question, he talked about not just people. He was talking about animals as well.
Yeah.
And I mean, let's face it, we see this enormous variation amongst animals. I mean, dogs and cats are the classic, aren't they? I mean, they're probably the commonest animals that we associate with. And the variation in dogs, not just domestic dogs, but if you spread that to wolves and coyotes and dingoes and so on, they're all dogs. And they can all interbreed, and it's generally accepted that they are all descended from the original dog. You know, some wolf-like dog, probably up in the northern hemisphere. Then
Would that have happened after Noah's flood?
Oh yeah, because any dogs that weren't on the ark with Noah didn't survive. The same goes for cats. And I mean, you look at the big cats like lions and tigers, and the smaller cats like domestic cats. But they're all cats, and they all behave like cats. And there's actually very, very little genetic difference between them. You know, I mean, there looks to be a lot of difference between a lion and a domestic cat, but they are very, very closely related. And if it's physically possible, they can all interbreed because, actually, it's not quite like that to say that all the big cats, for example, can interbreed. They are all cats, and they are descended from the cat survivors on Noah's Ark. Lions and tigers can interbreed, but not all the big cats can say interbreed with a lion. But you then find that a leopard and a puma can interbreed, or something like that, you know. And so there is a fair bit of difference as they have changed environmentally, but the basic premise still holds that all the cats are cats, and essentially they can all interbreed.
Now, I know I've asked this question before. We sometimes see in the news a certain animal that, you know, we've been told was extinct. They all of a sudden find it again. They go, oh, look, they're actually still there. Is that possibly because whatever they're upline in the same sort of animal, like, you know, a certain type of tabby cat becomes extinct, and then all of a sudden that same genetic information ends up back in that cat line, if you know what I mean, because they call them all different cats, and when it comes to, you know, things like rabbits or, you know, those sorts of things, you see that things have sort of come back to life where they thought they were gone. Is it possible?
That's usually because we've only thought they had become extinct. Where things have absolutely become extinct, I don't believe that's possible. For example, dodos would be the classic example. You're not going to go back to Madagascar and find dodos, because they certainly are extinct. And when particular animals have diversified to quite a large extent, if they then become extinct, you're never going to get that line again, or only with great difficulty by human intervention and various types of breeding. I was reading an article the other day on the Creation Ministries website about the Falkland Islands wolf, or Falkland Islands fox, and that's apparently been extinct since about the year 1600 and something. And there's some argument about how it actually got there, but it probably was taken from South America, and people there on the Falkland Islands bred it, and it diversified according to that environment, but died out, and nobody seems to know, I don't think, why it died out. But it was a funny-looking animal. You ought to look that one up, Mick. It was quite an interesting-looking dog-type animal.
Yes.
And then, of course, I mean, our classic in Australia is the Tassie tiger, isn't it? And he's not a dog. He looks a bit like one, but he's not a dog. And I've probably mentioned on this program before, when I was a medical student, I was absolutely fascinated by the in the Anatomy Museum at Melbourne University. they had a skeleton of a Tasmanian tiger. And alongside it, they had a skeleton of a dog. Now, only an expert can really tell the difference. And yet, from an evolutionist point of view, even a creationist point of view, they've come along completely different lines. The Tasmanian tiger is not a dog, but only an expert can tell the difference between a tiger skeleton and a dog skeleton.
And they're trying to bring them back again somehow.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful if they could. Well, I don't think that we can actually say the Tassie tiger's extinct. I mean, nobody's seen one for quite a long time, but there are claimed sightings, and people say that they've found scats from what might be a Tasmanian tiger. I don't really know, but I'd love to think that it wasn't extinct. I'm sure everybody would.
Yeah, but what about this whole, matching the DNA and adding it to something else and bringing one back? Do you think that's possible?
Well, it depends on how intact the DNA is. Now, when you think of the cloning that has been done, I think the first famous clone was Dolly the sheep.
Yes.
And I think Dolly was cloned from an udder cell. Right? Now, obviously a sheep cell, but if you could get a Tasmanian tiger cell that was genetically intact, then hypothetically you might be able to clone one by using a surrogate mother. It'd be very, very interesting. I mean, as we know, people are trying to do that with things like the woolly mammoth. They want to be able to reproduce the woolly mammoth by using an Asian elephant as a surrogate mother. And there may be a possibility of getting mammoth cells back because they have been snap frozen. So who knows? I mean, it's exciting stuff, but it's in the realm of science fiction at the moment. But you never
they
know.
have actually made woolly mammoth meatballs, though.
Oh, yeah, but that's because there's been meat in the deep freeze for quite a while, and they've been able to get it out there. I mean, woolly mammoths have been excavated from the permafrost in Siberia, and the meat has been fed to animals. As you rightly say, you can make it into mammoth meatballs.
These ones are ones where they've actually taken a little bit of meat and then grown it in a Petri dish and grown it so there's a whole lot more of the same meat. So now they can keep regrowing the same meatball over and over, apparently. And, I saw photos of it. It just looked like a meatball to me. I was keen to have a taste, but...
Not sure that I want to eat a woolly mammoth.
Yeah, well, I guess you don't know what sort of diseases you're going to get. Because
it takes you a long time to eat it. How do you eat a woolly mammoth?
One bite at a time. Yes, absolutely. Oh, Dr. John, we've come to the end of our time again. It goes so quick, and what an interesting conversation today. Yeah, when you look at skin colour in particular and the way people dispersed around the planet, and as you rightly say, it is written in the book, and all we have to do is read that book.
Well, that's right, and that's our starting point for everything in the scientific field, because our claim is that the Bible is true from the very first verse, and if you take it as true and you start from there rather than trying to make up stories, then you will usually get a story that makes a whole lot of sense. Whereas with the evolutionary stories, they have to be changed all the time as something new is discovered. But the Bible doesn't change. What it said when it was first written, it still says today, and what we find when we look at the scientific evidence is that it's all consistent with that.
Absolutely. You are on 94.9. It is 9 minutes to 5. Thank you, Dr. John. Another awesome afternoon. And Isabel, thank you for coming in, and it's awesome having your questions coming in nice and fresh. And, of course, we love all you guys that send questions, and we just got another one come through. I've been sort of chatting too much to notice it, but we'll put that one on notice for next time, I think. The question was, and why doesn't variation qualify as evolution? Can we answer that very quickly?
Well, I mean, we don't believe it is evolution, and the reason we don't is that you can't create any additional new genetic information. The variation we see comes from a reshuffling of what's already there, and sometimes associated with a loss of the genetic information that's already there. But it's not created anew. What God created in the beginning is all there is. Now, because he created man and animals originally, then in those original ones, we believe that the entire variation that we can see now was built into those genetics. And as we discussed, dispersion into various areas around the world allowed for adaptation to that particular environment, so there would be a reshuffling of what was there, but not a creation of anything new.
That's awesome. Thank you, Dr. John. Another awesome afternoon. Hey, if you have any questions for Creation Ministries guys next week, please send them through to our text line. Just SMS 0401 949 949. You are on 94.9 and it's 7 minutes.